lying?
Yeah.
Why would you put him in the room and lock him in a bedroom, a tiny little bedroom with a roided up?
Yeah.
Just stop and think about that. You're in a room smaller than this studio that you and I are in right now with a roided up.
Well, it is a Pandora's box in a way. Yeah, sure. Because basically, if you go, as my books show, if you go as deep as I went in writing those 2 books, and you could certainly go deeper, it basically shows that, the world is basically run by a meta cartel.
Jeffrey Epps didn't hang himself in that cell. He was extracted, and the people who made it happen are still calling the shots. Everyone bought the self-harm story because the cameras failed. The guards fell asleep and the autopsy photos vanished until Ghislaine Maxwell's latest court filing landed like a grenade, naming 29 men who cut secret deals to stay out of the files. And the Department of Justice is now scrambling to redact names faster than they can explain why the released documents include forged self-harm footage and a fake letter linking a former president to underage exploitation. The DOJ missed its December 19th due date to release over 2 million pages of evidence, publishing less than 1%, while Attorney General Pam Bondi claims near-term transparency. Yet, her team just admitted to planting fabricated materials in the public record. Leon Black paid Epstein $170 million for tax advice, settled a $62.5 million lawsuit with no charges, music, and testified about partying with Donald Trump in Moscow clubs, while the DOJ's redaction army works overtime to scrub names from 200 gigabytes of seized tapes they refuse to acknowledge exist. The problem isn't what's in the files, it's that the
files. We've seen dozens of new photos we haven't seen before of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell with very high-profile people, celebrities, people like Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson, like you showed, also like British royalty and actors. All of that we sort of knew was happening. I want to highlight specifically 2 for the public interest, and that is President Clinton and President...
It's that the files are still being edited, and the men who settled aren't acting like men who believe the threat is over. The real question isn't whether Epstein is gone, but who's still paying to keep the operation running. And what happens when the next batch of names drops before the due date they've already ignored. The Department of Justice's latest letter to the federal judges overseeing Jeffrey Epstein's case arrived on a Tuesday, signed by Attorney General Pam Bondi, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and Manhattan's top prosecutor Jay Clayton. It promised transparency in the near term, a phrase so deliberately vague it might as well have been written in invisible ink. The problem isn't just that they missed the December 19th due date to release over 2 million pages of documents. Music is that they've only made public 12,285 files, a fraction of 1% of the total, while quietly admitting some of those contain fabricated materials. This isn't a delay. It's a controlled demolition of the truth, and the timing is suspicious. Just days earlier, Ghislaine Maxwell's legal team dropped a habeas petition naming 29 men who allegedly cut secret settlements with Epstein's victims. Men who were never indicted, whose names remain redacted, and who, according to people tracking the case, are still very much in play. Here's where the story starts to bend. The DOJ claims they're protecting victims by redacting names. Yet, the files they have released include a forged self-harm video and a fake letter purporting to show Epstein corresponding with convicted abuser Larry Nassar.
This just broke moments ago. Democrats on the House Oversight Committee have released photos from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. We're getting dribs and drabs of this, and we had some pictures already, and here's some. There are some that show Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Steve Bannon, Bill Gates, and others. None of the released images depicts any misconduct. None is believed to depict underage girls. It was not immediately clear when or where they were.
Music documents so poorly constructed that even the DOJ's own social media accounts had to issue a warning. This fake letter serves as a reminder that just because a document is released by the Department of Justice does not make the allegations or claims within the document factual. That's not a disclaimer. Music, that's an admission. They're not just withholding evidence. They're actively poisoning the well. Music. And the question no one in the mainstream press is asking is simple. If the files are so sensitive that they require this level of manipulation, music, what's really in the other 99% that they're still hiding? The answer might lie in the behavior of the men connected to Epps who aren't acting like men who believe the threat is over. Take Leon Black, the former CEO of Apollo Global Management, who paid Epstein $170 million for what was officially described as tax and estate planning.
That the Bureau of Prisons gets to decide. The Bureau of Prisons is run independently from the FBI, from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from the judiciary, and who knows where the person's going to go. That's just how it happens.
Right.
So for Ghislaine Maxwell to have been transferred to actually a prison that has very, very minimal security and is just not fit for someone who's been convicted of horrible crimes.
Music, that's a strange kind of financial advice when the advisor in question is a registered offender with a history of exploitative behavior. Black later settled a separate lawsuit with the U.S. Virgin Islands for $62.5 million. Again, no criminal charges, just a quiet financial transaction to make a problem disappear. But here's the part that doesn't add up. In 2018, Black testified under oath about a trip he took with Donald Trump to Russia in the 1990s where, according to his own sworn statement, they attended a concert, a discotheque, and might have been in a club together. Music, that's not a memory lapse. That's a man carefully choosing his words because he knows the wrong ones could unravel something bigger. And now with Maxwell's filing naming Black among the 29, the question isn't just what he paid for. It's what he's still protecting. The DOJ's handling of the files suggests they're not just redacting names. Music, they're managing an ongoing operation. Consider the 200 gigabytes of seized videos and audio recordings mentioned in a July 2025 FBI memo that have yet to see the light of day. The official explanation is that these contain sensitive material involving victims. But people familiar with the investigation describe them differently. Not as evidence of crimes but as a ledger, a record of who was where, with whom, music, and under what circumstances. That's not the kind of thing you bury to protect the innocent. That's the kind of thing you suppress to protect the powerful. And the DOJ's own poll numbers confirm the public isn't buying their story. 66% of Americans believe the government is intentionally holding back information. That's not skepticism. Music, that's a verdict. Then there's the matter of the 29 men Maxwell named in her filing. The DOJ's response: more redactions, more delays.
Again, there was new names in some of the emails that I think investigators need to look at. In particular, I jumped on the name of a modeling agent who, in a similar fashion to Jean-Luc Brunel, who brought underage girls from overseas to Jeffrey Epstein for abuse. There was another man. What was interesting about this other individual is that he also apparently provided young models for Donald Trump's modeling agency.
Delays. More promises of transparency that never arrive. But the silence from the named individuals is even more telling. Music, no denials, no lawsuits, no public outrage, just a quiet, coordinated effort to keep the names out of the press. That's not the behavior of men who believe the story is over. That's the behavior of men who know the next chapter hasn't been written yet. And if the DOJ is still redacting their names while releasing forged documents, the logical conclusion is that they're not just hiding the past, they're shaping the future. The most damning detail might be what's happening in the background. While the public focuses on the DOJ's stalling tactics, insiders note that Ghislaine Maxwell's prison conditions have quietly improved. She's no longer in a high-security facility, but in what's been described as a Club Med prison with rumors of a work release program in the works. That's not a reward for good behavior. That's a music negotiation. And if
So basically what I argue in my book is that the network behind Epstein and the reason why there's so many powerful people in this group is because it's born out of this union that occurred during World War II between organized crime and the nascent U.S. intelligence apparatus, which of course there was a lot of British involvement with that when in the creation of, the CIA and the O.
And if Maxwell is the only one talking, the question isn't just what she knows, it's what she's being offered to keep quiet. Meanwhile, the DOJ's next due date looms. And the betting among those watching the case closely isn't on whether music, they'll meet it, but on what they'll release to distract from what they're still hiding. The files aren't just a record of what happened, they're a map of who's still in the game. And the DOJ's behavior suggests they're not just protecting the past, they're managing the present. Music, the forged documents, the redacted names, the stalled releases, none of it looks like incompetence. It looks like a system protecting itself. And if the next batch of
And I think these things like Epstein, and there's probably a bunch of other similar operations that are being run, they provide you with like a really good time, or maybe you're a high profile, extremely wealthy individual, and it's hard for you to get hosed. And some guy tells you, hey, we've got everything covered. You know, you come to my island, nothing, you know, what happens on the island stays on the island.
And if the next batch of files drops before the due date, the real story won't be what's in them. It'll be what's still missing. The Epstein case was never just about one man's crimes. It was about the infrastructure that allowed those crimes to function as a service for the powerful. And that infrastructure didn't collapse when Epstein allegedly took his own life in a high-security prison cell with 2 malfunctioning cameras and guards who somehow failed to check on him for hours. It adapted. Music, the same network of influence, leverage, and quiet financial transactions that protected Epps during his lifetime, is still operating. And the Department of Justice's behavior suggests they're not just covering up the past, they're managing an active operation. The real question isn't what happened to Epstein, but who inherited the system he built, and why the DOJ is so desperate to control the narrative around Consider the Patterns. Music Leon Black didn't just pay Epstein $170 million for financial advice. He settled a separate $62.5 million lawsuit with the U.S. Virgin Islands without ever facing criminal charges. That's not a one-time payout. That's a subscription fee. And Black isn't the only one. The 29 men named in Ghislaine Maxwell's habeas petition didn't cut secret deals because they were afraid of lawsuits. They did it because they were investing in their continued access to a system that offered them protection. This wasn't about avoiding consequences. It was about maintaining privileges. And the fact that none of these men have been indicted despite Maxwell's filing suggests the deals they made weren't just with Epstein. They were with the people who took over his operation after he was gone. And the Clinton connection adds another layer to this. Epstein didn't just visit the White House 17 times during the 1990s. He was meeting with Mark Middleton, a senior aide who later became a key figure in the Clinton Foundation's global initiatives. That's not a coincidence. It's a pipeline. And the foundation's ties to the Maxwell family, particularly Isabel Maxwell, whose nonprofit work overlapped with the Clinton Global Initiative, suggests this wasn't just about personal relationships. Music, it was about institutional access. The same network that allegedly facilitated Epstein's activities in the private sector seems to have had open doors in the political world. And the fact that none of this has been seriously investigated suggests the protection isn't just for individuals, it's for the system itself. Then there's the modeling industry angle, which has been strangely absent from the mainstream coverage.
The Justice Department has finally released some of the highly anticipated Epstein files. More than 300,000 pages of documents related to the late convicted offender were made public today. They include photos, flight logs, grand jury testimony, and a lot of heavy redactions.
John Casablancas, the founder of Elite Model Management, didn't just run a talent agency. He built a global operation that, according to multiple accounts, functioned as a supply chain for powerful men with specific tastes. His protégés didn't just work in fashion, music, they ended up in politics, finance, and even the Trump administration. And the fact that Casablancas himself was open about his preferences, once telling an interviewer, "I like very young girls," wasn't a scandal. It was a signal. Music, this wasn't a secret. It was a system with its own rules, its own language, and its own protection mechanisms. And Epstein wasn't an outlier in that world. Music, he was a node in a much larger network. The arms dealer Adnan Kazajabal's name appearing in the same circles as Epstein and Casablancas isn't just music a footnote. It's a clue. Kazajabal wasn't just a client of Epstein's. He was a figure in the Iran-Contra affair. A man with deep ties to intelligence agencies and a reputation for operating in the gray zones between legality and criminality. His presence in this network suggests Epstein's operation wasn't just about personal indulgence. It was about leverage. And if Kosajabal was involved, it's reasonable to assume that the operation had connections to the same kinds of people who used his services: politicians who needed plausible deniability, businessmen who wanted access to power, and intelligence operatives who saw an opportunity to collect compromising material. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's a business model. The Department of Justice's insistence on redacting names and withholding evidence starts to make sense in this context. They're not just protecting individuals, they're protecting the relationships between them. The 200 gigabytes of seized videos and audio recordings aren't just evidence of crimes. Music, they're a map of who is connected to whom, under what circumstances, and...
Oh, but we have a congressional act now to requiring the release, but they're going to say, you know
subject
what?
To
Tom
redaction.
Hanks, it's unfair that he was mentioned because
the law
he was eating
says
Skittles.
Subject to redaction. Subject to redaction.
And we all know what that means. That's to protect.
That's why I'm saying you will never be satisfied.
Circumstances and with what implications. And the fact that the DOJ is still fighting to keep that material hidden suggests it's not just about the past. It's about who still has access to that information and what they're using it for. The forged documents, the stalled releases, the careful redactions, none of it looks like incompetence. It looks like damage control for a system that's still operational. And a lot of heavy redact. Ghislaine Maxwell's improved prison conditions and the rumors of a potential work release program aren't signs that the system is weakening. They're signs that she's still part of it. She's not being rewarded for good behavior. She's being managed. And if she's the only one talking, the question isn't just what she knows. It's what she's being offered to keep quiet. The fact that